kick us on? Very good. Well, good morning and welcome to the WSAFCA flood control meeting today. And I think first order of business today would be to have the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mike Bissett, lead us in the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
Okay, we have a pretty large crowd. If anyone wishes to speak, I think everybody understands. I would really like to have one of these yellow slips so that I can organize things so that we can do things in an orderly manner. Mr. Denton will not be here this evening or this morning. He has some health issues, and so this is the board that's going to hear the various comments and the agendas today. With that, I mean, I realize that sometimes when people speak in public, it's pretty difficult for a lot of people, and so I would certainly appreciate no catcalls or boos or any of the other things that go on, because some people get intimidated with it, and it's just really not the right thing to do. So I'll try to keep a very orderly meeting, and we'll see what's going on. With that, then, we will open up the meeting, and I'm looking for first order of business will be approval of the agenda. So moved. Been moved and second. Any opposed? So be it. Second one is going to be public comment on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission. And I do have one slip to speak on that, and that's Kim McDonald.
My name is Kim McDonald, and I've lived on South River Road for more than 20 years. Within sight of the river for almost all my life, and I wish to make comment on some of the things said at last month's meeting. I want to point out that WSAFCA's plan to take as much private property as possible in order to reduce the city's cost of the levee project is wrong. Only one member of the council commented on the incongruity of this line of thinking last month. It was also extremely difficult to hear Mrs. Galvez describe me one of a handful of people delaying the safety of thousands in Southport. About 20 years ago, property owners on South River Road were forced to give up ownership of the levee and allow an easement on our adjacent property. The berm was built on the land side, taking a large chunk of each parcel. We were told this project would surpass the mandated standards for flood protection. The next high water event proved the engineers had made mistakes. Today, we are being told the same story by the same group of people and are expected to surrender our homes and way of life for a project that builds an overbuilt design to hold back an improbable high water event. More upsetting is the fact that the plan results in the city taking ownership of most of the Southport waterfront and WSAFCA acting like it's an unexpected windfall. WSAFCA has taken the stand that the more land they can promise for projects that aren't for flood protection, the more money they can get from government sources to defray the city's cost. It's one thing to ask us again to give up our land for public safety, but it should be criminal to have one's property taken as a mitigation factor for future development. When Mr. Bissett talks of reducing the footprint to take less property, he has never done so to save a home. It is for the land behind the waterfront, land primarily owned by developers. The city is using a safety issue to scare the public into letting them take possession of the waterfront. The city is using eminent domain to strong-arm prime land locations from longtime landowners. They did it at the high school, they are doing it on the north side of the locks, and they want to do it to us. WSAFCA is pushing to move this project forward quickly while funding is available from federal and state sources, while bids may be lower because people are hungry for work. No earnest time or effort has been spent on alternatives that would save our homes, because that would increase the cost beyond the city's means. I find a serious lack of humanity that you see nothing wrong with destroying our homes and way of life in the name of safety while planning to profit by using this legally stolen land to hype the city's image with more recreational area. Even the road that they plan to put back in place of the river road is going to be on the land side beyond the levee instead of on top again. That just takes more land. And the reason for doing it that way is it helps development in later times. I don't want my property used for mitigation.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to comment on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission? Okay. Looking for approval of the February 12th minutes. So moved? So moved. And seconded? It's been moved and seconded. Any opposed? Hearing none, so ordered. Review of the monthly year-to-date revenue expenses.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This reporting period is for January 2012. On the receipt side, we received $852,000 in funds from the state funding agreement related to ongoing work on the EIP projects. And also we booked $1.8 million in assessment revenue for the month of January. On the expense side, it was mostly, as you can see in the report, dominated by the rivers and CHP projects and also ongoing work on the Southport project. It brought the expenses and revenues brought our current cash position to $13.5 million at this time. Page 2 summarizes each of the project's expenses by the contractor's revenue or contract invoices, if you would like to look at that later at some other time. And that pretty much concludes the report. Staff will be working on a true-up with the bond fund to move some of them out of the sequestered bond fund into the cash position, which will probably give us more liquid cash in the next month. You won't see that happen, but it's an internal moving to keep our cash on hand up at a level so we keep going on with work. And that ends the report.
Does anybody have any questions? Any comments? Looking for approval of the financial statement. Also moved. It's been moved. It's been seconded. Thank you. Consideration or approval of the financial statements for fiscal year 2010-11. Who has that one? You? Okay.
The financial statements are a requirement of state and federal regulations and also on professionally too. The city as the trusted fund holder of WSAFCA hires an independent auditor to review the city WSAFCA statements. The statements were found to be in compliance with the Governmental Accounting Standards Board all materially. So they're in good position. They look good. They read well, et cetera. The only thing we were asked by previously by the board member if there would be a management discussion analysis, and there wasn't in this year's statements, but we will in the future include a management discussion analysis section in the statements going forward. And that's pretty much the end of it. The reports are good. They need to be accepted by the board, and I would ask that the board accept them.
Okay. Any questions? Any comments? Looking for a motion then to consider approval of the financial statements for fiscal year 2010-2011.
Also move.
Moved and seconded. Are there any opposed? Hearing none. That is so ordered. Consideration and identification of a preferred alternative for the levee improvements for the Sacramento River Southport Early Implementation Project.
Okay, good morning. Dave Spock's going to give this presentation today.
Thank you, Michael.
Dave.
Good morning, Chairman Christoph, and members of the board. Thank you for giving me a little bit of time. Could you put up the PowerPoint show, please, Chris? Building levees has been compared to all kinds of things like making sausage, but the analogy that I like the most is a bit like building a big and very complicated puzzle. I'm going to need just a little bit of light so I can read my scribbles here. Thank you. You start with the big puzzle. You got a huge pile of pieces in front of you. It's chaotic, it's disconnected, and it's confusing. It's pretty intimidating. And the first thing one starts to do is look for patterns in the pieces to see how things can start to be arranged. And in the absence of any connections that are apparent, just look for colors that look the same, or patterns or shapes that start to look the same, or some relationship at all. And it's really chaotic. It's pretty intimidating. It's hard to find a way. But as the pieces start to get sorted out, the connections start to reveal themselves, and the patterns start to show new information about how to make the next choice, how to progressively guess a little less, and over time one becomes a little more confident that the next pick is the right choice. Eventually, the work in putting that big puzzle together moves from trying to resolve chaos to increasingly smart choices, and then finally just putting together all the pieces. So each time we meet, the board puts another piece in the Southport EIP puzzle, and with each piece, the picture begins to emerge, and we start to have a better idea of what it looks like, and it becomes more clear to the eye. The staff report for this item does a really good job describing the pieces that have been placed in the puzzle to date. And rather than go through those details with you, I trust you've had a chance to look at it. The material's posted on the web. It's been up for a couple weeks. What I'd like to do in this presentation is place some emphasis on the key issues that and the main purposes of today's puzzle piece, which is the identification of a preferred alternative for the project environmental impact statement and environmental impact report. Over 2 years ago, January 2010, the Southport EIP was selected after the WSAFCA project team went through an exhaustive screening exercise looking at all the system levies and the 3 EIPs that had been selected for early work. And on the basis of that screening exercise, which used data from the 2008 problem identification report and the 2009 alternatives analysis, the Southport Sacramento River Reach was found to be the levee section in poorest condition with the highest risk of failure, and therefore was selected as the next EIP. And at that point, the stage was set for a series of investigations and design development at progressively greater level of detail and precision. Again, we had the pile of pieces, but then the exercise was to begin sorting them out and do the best we could with the available information and taking the step to get the next information to do the best job picking the next piece. That sequence of work is guided by a design decision hierarchy and sequence. One of the attachments, actually the first attachments in your staff report, this slide summarizes the major stages in that hierarchy. And the work to date in the first 3 task orders is focused on the first 3 steps, which are to identify a particular problem. So what's the matter with the levee? And once those problems have been identified and then specifically relevant to the Southport levee, because it's different than others, to test particular solutions for those problems that would work under the geotechnical and hydraulic conditions of the Southport levee system. And then to begin to assemble solutions that combine measures that are technically feasible in this place in ways that are more than less likely of being delivered. And that begins to take consideration of funding and various other constraints upon WSAFCA's ability to deliver flood protection to the community. So the work that's been done to date in task orders 1, 2, and 3, just to quickly catch everyone up, since we're building a puzzle and it's a cumulative process. Task order 1 focus was on gathering additional information and a site-specific evaluation of levee deficiencies. It also determine the outer bounds of what kind of setback levy would make sense to spend WSAFCA's resources investigating. And we heard ideas as crazy as, well, put the levy at Vacaville, or maybe put it at Jefferson. The point was those were absurd for a number of reasons, but there were a number of other levy, setback levy distances, such as 1,000 feet, that seemed to have some credence, but we investigated the likelihood of that type of setback distance being an effective approach for WSAFCA and determined essentially the outer bound of an appropriate setback levy in Task Order 1. In Task Order 2, we needed to keep on gathering more data, more frequent spacing or more close spacing for geotechnical evaluations, begin to investigate environmental and physical conditions in the field, and to continue to evaluate that information to determine measures that would correct the deficiencies that had been found in the particular conditions of Southport. One of the main outcomes of Task Order 2 was to set up what we called three combined measure alternatives, essentially associating the solutions by general levy type. CMA 1, which essentially laid out a solution which was primarily an adjacent levy. CMA 2, which laid out a set of solutions that were primarily a setback levy, and CMA 3, which organized solutions largely fixing the levy in place, repairing the existing levy. Part of that arrangement was driven by convenience. We needed to create some order in the chaos about how to stage subsequent evaluations, and part of it was governed by a need to lay out essentially the physical extent of possible levy improvements. And these three CMAs then became the basis for early work in evaluating potential environmental impacts. In Task Order 3, yet more data has been collected. We expect to have a little bit more gathered in 4, but the objective in 3 was to conclusively determine technical feasibility of measures that would fix both levy and seepage deficiencies, and to take a good look at potential costs for delivering levy solutions in the form of the three CMAs that I just described. Recognizing that those arrangements, again, they were laid out for a number of operational purposes, didn't necessarily represent a combination or set of combinations that would attract or most efficiently use available funding resources. The other objective in Task Order 3 was to create two design alternatives taken to 15% level of completion and precision and confidence that combine the different levy and seepage remediation measures in ways that appeared to us on the basis of available information and the known set of rules that the state uses for sharing in the costs of levy delivery, the best prospects or likely prospects for actually being able to deliver all the flood protection that's necessary in the Southport Sacramento River levee as soon as possible, which is a main goal of the board. An important hallmark of the work in the last three task orders has been constant and increasing efforts to provide the results of these technical evaluations to the community through a wide variety of media and venues. This board has directed the project team very explicitly to do whatever it can to engage with property owners, to share information in ways that meet property owner preferences, and that work has been done faithfully, and we will continue to do so. I'd like to just take a few minutes just to reacquaint the board and members of the community with the three CMAs to see how they look. It's a little bit awkward with this overhead, but I'm hoping, go ahead and take it down. Take the lights down. I can make it through this point for the next three slides. I'm going to use a laser pointer that the board members can't see, but I'll try to move in an orderly way. The adjacent levee, you can see here different colors. Essentially, this solution would construct a levee immediately landward of the existing levee in the entire reach, with the exception of Bees Lakes. And seepage remediation would be implemented in ways that were demanded essentially by the geotechnical constraints at each location. So in the south, at the downstream extent, seepage could be remedied through the installation of a cutoff wall, but where one sees these yellow bands, those are locations where a cutoff wall at the level of information available when this is designed would not have been an effective way to stop seepage, so a seepage berm is proposed. CMA2 is a setback levy theme, so for almost all of the extent of the levy, a setback is proposed running from a couple hundred feet to about 400 feet offset landward from the existing levee. Seepage remediation measures are essentially the same because we're still dealing with the same geotechnical constraints. The exception to a setback in CMA 1, 2, and 3 is in the furthest upstream segment called segment G. Essentially, this is the segment of the levee that's immediately waterward of the Riva and Perella developments. This would be an adjacent levee with a cutoff wall. The third CMA that was created and is presently in the roster of alternatives for the environmental impact studies is the fix in place. This essentially would alter the existing levee so that it would comply with state and federal regulations. And for the most part, what this means is flattening the slope of the levee sides. We're fortunate in Southport that for the most part, the levee achieves adequate height for protection from a 200-year level, 200-year frequency storm, but the levee is over steep in virtually everywhere, and there are erosion issues, erosion problems. The fix-in-place solution would again flatten the levee slopes, would also install extensive erosion protection because, as it's been determined, there's quite a bit of erosion activity throughout the extent of the levee here. The two design alternatives that were developed in Task Order 3, again, intended to deliver an image, a picture, a layout of the different levee and seepage remediation measures that would attract the most substantial share of funding contribution from the state, but also take the best advantage of WSAFCA's local funding capacity, which is limited, and do so in a way that could deliver the entire levee improvement bundle at one time. There are two design alternatives at the 15% level. Today's action would essentially pick one of them or identify one of them as essentially the fourth build alternative to be evaluated in the environmental impact study and environmental impact report. So I'll briefly describe what these two do. The board saw these last month, but I want to just refresh everyone's memory about what's here. Starting from the downstream segment, the components lay out this way. So segment G at the far south end, this is essentially an adjacent levee, or it's an adjacent levee that's very tight up to the existing embankment. Seepage is stopped with a conventional cutoff wall. Moving northward into segment B, that cutoff wall continues for a short distance and then transitions to an adjacent levee with a seepage berm, which then transitions to a setback levee through segments C, D, E, ending just north of Bees Lake. So actually transitioning back just north of Bees Lakes to at Linden Road back to an adjacent levee. From Linden North, an adjacent levee to a position at segment G, and continuing in segment G, adjacent to Riva and Perella with an adjacent levee with a seepage wall. Where you see the pink line, these are locations where, based on data available at the time, it was not technically feasible to use a cutoff wall to stop seepage, and so a seepage berm is indicated. That's alternative 1. Alternative 2 looks a lot like alternative 1, and really that is the case. For the most part, alternatives 1 and 2 consist of the same configuration or the use of the same mix of levee and seepage remediation measures. Again, because these are optimizing technically feasible measures in place and also are the most financially efficient means of delivering the entire project at one time within specifically limited resources of WSAFCA. But the difference between Alternative 1 and Alternative 2 is essentially the extent of setback levy. Where Alternative 1 transitioned in this northerly position here to a setback, Alternative 2 has an additional length of setback. And where Alternative 1 in segment F essentially used an adjacent levee for virtually its entire extent, in Alternative 2, a setback levee is selected for the extent of segment F. So that's essentially the difference between the two. Given those distinctions, last month, the WSAFCA board, in considering the two alternatives and the task order for request by the WSAFCA team, directed the team to initiate value engineering studies in segments B and F where there's some difference in the extent of setback between the two design alternatives. The point of those investigations is to take a harder look one more time at the technical feasibility and cost of potential combinations of seepage and levee measures to see if there's a way to reduce the extent of the project footprint, reduce the amount of land that would be needed to construct the project, and therefore potentially reduce and minimize impacts on private properties that are adjacent to the project. The value engineering study has been very much influenced by and guided by the significant amount of public outreach that has been conducted and for this project. And the scope, in fact, has been fairly well set by comments that the board has received and the board's direction to staff to continue to investigate potential ways to minimize impacts on private property. The value engineering studies will also investigate potential costs associated with implementing different approaches to levee and seepage remediation. The objective of that is to present the community and the board with a full package of potential options for the levee in those two reaches, as well as the potential cost consequences of different options in the context of the entire project. The board also directed the team to get going on 65% design in those portions of, or those segments of design Alternative 1 or Alternative 2 that are exactly the same, that appear to be warranted no matter what the circumstances are. And so we're moving forward on that. This is really the most expeditious way for us to stay on track and to put this board in a position to deliver the flood risk reduction to residents of the city and Southport as quickly as possible. Today the board is being asked to select a design alternative as a preferred alternative to include in, to essentially identify a preferred alternative for the environmental analysis. Taking that step today completes the range of alternatives that are presently under evaluation in the environmental impact studies. That includes both technical feasibility as well as the community's ability in partnership with the state to actually deliver a set of improvements. The environmental impact study and impact report will evaluate the preferred alternative that the board identifies today, along with the 3 previously identified CMAs. The advantages to taking this step at this time is, there are several. One is to enable timely initiation by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers of their lengthy evaluation of a proposal from WSAFCA to modify the federal project levy. The entire Southport levy is a federal project, and there's a long lead time in federal approval of proposed actions to improve that levy. It also helps us begin a long process for obtaining an encroachment permit from the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. The board staff are very careful in implementing their responsibilities under the Title 23 of the state code. And so their oversight, which is crucial for project success, takes time. And the sooner we begin that interaction, the sooner we can begin building solutions for the community. We also, selection today of a preferred alternative, or identification of, sorry, of a preferred alternative, helps us to begin coordination with state and federal regulatory agencies whose concerns relate to environmental resources and habitat. This is a big bundle of permitting that needs to be done, typically in parallel with the NEPA and CEQA processes, but they're very time-consuming, and the earlier we begin that, the better likely that permit process stays off the critical path for construction. And finally, identifying a preferred alternative today helps to keep the CEQA process on pace, and the quicker that we are able to complete the CEQA process and the board is able to certify a final environmental impact report, the sooner that we can continue with the real estate process. There are a number, this board has heard a number of requests from property owners to move things along as expeditiously as possible, given the uncertainty that this process places them in, not knowing what's next and what's coming. So the sooner we can advance the environmental impact study under CEQA, the more rapidly we can progress through that real estate process. I want to make a point, I want to emphasize this is very, very important, that identifying a preferred alternative today completes the range of alternatives and therefore provides the best opportunity for complete evaluation and disclosure under the CEQA and NEPA processes. Identifying a preferred alternative today does not in any way constrain the board's discretion in making its final project approval after the environmental documentation process is complete. So looking forward to next steps from today's action, the environmental impact statement and report process will continue. We are on pace to release a draft environmental impact study impact report to the public this fall. That's a crucial milestone, and it of course affects schedule from that point forward. Our target is to present a final environmental impact report in compliance with CEQA to this board for certification in January of next year. In parallel with the environmental process, 65% plans, specifications, and cost estimates work will be moving along, and we expect to have that stage, that milestone reached this fall, which will enable the board to make a final project selection in January when you're presented with the final environmental impact report. Subsequent to that, final construction documents would then be expected in late spring of 2013, which will enable the WSAFCA team to solicit bids for construction of the first phase of the project in June of next year. The Sacramento-Southport River, the Southport-Sacramento River levee has been found to be the most vulnerable component of the city's levee system. The team that's working for WSAFCA is very concerned about the risks of flooding and the resulting danger of devastating impacts to people's businesses, their property, and their lives. City leadership and this board has made very clear that flood protection is the #1 priority for the city for the last 5 years in a row, and this staff is fully committed to the mission of protecting West Sacramento residents and properties. We're also committed to finding solutions that are technically feasible that at the same time balance the greatest public good with the least private impact. The project work this year, in fact, will focus on achieving that balance, a balance that will work best for the whole community. I hope this presentation and the staff report that you have in front of you provides the information you need to make your decision today, and I'd like to ask that if you have any questions about the material and the action that you let me know what they are. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
On alternative 3, you said talked about just widening the levees.
I'm sorry?
On alternative 3.
The fixed in place alternative?
Would you rebuild those levees and then widen them, or just add soil to the outside? How would you structure that?
The fix-in-place alternative would take that existing levee shape, it kind of looks like this. It has very oversteepened sides and flatten those sides out. So,
Leaving the middle the same 100 years old levee?
well, the levee structure itself, if it's taken by itself without even discussing seepage, that levee structure can be made more stable by lowering the slopes, by reducing the slopes on the levee sides. Now, in addition to doing that, because that levee has a lot of energy put on it by the river, we'd have to install quite a bit of revetment and other types of erosion protection on the water
that's
side.
what I was wondering.
A lot of revetment. Would the top of the levee get wider? Probably not. The objective there would be to minimally comply with the standards of the state and the federal government for a 20-foot wide crown. But the footprint of the levee would expand because you'd have to lower those slope, and that trapezoidal shape would get bigger.
But our setback levees would have the same structure also.
Setback levees would have the same minimum requirement structure.
Meeting
the 3-to-1 side slopes and then a 20-foot wide crown.
Round.
That's correct.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got it. Dave, I want to make sure I understand this right. At the last meeting, we set aside sections B and section F, and they were not going to go forward with the 65% design, and we're going to look to study that further. By approving your proposed alternative today, we're not giving the go-ahead for 65% design on those two sections as well, are we? Or
No, you are not.
that study is still
That's a great
ongoing?
question, Board Member Ramos. A very important question. The two design alternatives have a different footprint. Okay, one of them has a slightly larger footprint because the extent of the setback levee is larger. For the purposes of environmental studies, we want to make sure that we're not missing anything, and so therefore we want to take a look at a reasonably deliverable alternative that demonstrates perhaps the worst case footprint and thus the worst case bundle of potential environmental and community effects. That's an advantage. By identifying that footprint as a preferred alternative, you're not giving any direction to staff to change the sequence of investigations and design work that you've given us in the past. Not at all. In fact, it's very clear from a design on the design side of the house, different than the environmental impact side of the house. On the design side, we have clear understanding that we have a bit of homework to do, along with additional interaction with affected property owners in segments B and F before this board decides to give us direction on 65% design in segments B. But so identifying the alternative number 2 puts this board in the best, essentially, circumstance, gives you the most options for making your final project selection at the end of the environmental process. Okay.
Anybody else? Any other questions? I do have one, and that is, if design alternative number 2 is the preferred alternative and chosen, that just really allows for the EIR to move forward, or the EIS. During that process, if through the evaluation of the geotechnical stuff, if less property is needed, then that would also come to the board as far as what's really going on.
Correct.
Okay. At this time, I have a couple people that would like to speak, and so I'm going to bring them forward. Mark Gilbert.
Members of the board, good morning. My name's Mark Gilbert. I work for NGO Incorporated. I'm a principal geotechnical engineer, and I've been retained by 4 homeowners who lie at the south end of Reach B. Perhaps you've been aware of my involvement in this. I've been working somewhat closely with the technical team, and I certainly appreciate all of their efforts to allow an outsider to come in and review the data and take a look at the information. And I just want to reiterate to you today some of the findings that we've come up with regard to Reach B. First of all, we've taken a look at all the data that's been done so far, and I'm very glad to hear that they're going to be accumulating more data. Reach B is a tricky area. What was communicated very early on was that a cutoff wall through Reach B was technically infeasible. There are portions of Reach B, particularly the northern part, where I agree with that. The southern part, I don't agree with it. A 130-foot deep cutoff wall is well within the means of today's construction capabilities and has been proven. And the presence of dense gravels would not preclude that from being done practically. Of course, the issue of cost is a big one, and that should come to this board to make that decision. But I just want to reiterate, and I've already done so with the technical team, that it is not technically infeasible for the southern part of Reach B to put in a deep cutoff wall. We have done an independent seepage analysis just to double check the work that's been done. There is one cross-section drawn in Reach B, which is a mile-long section, and the results of that analysis show that there are some under-seepage issues. We don't disagree with that. Our findings confirm that there are under-seepage issues that do need to be addressed. I want to emphasize to the board the importance, particularly in these areas where there is potential significant land take, to implement rigorous quality assurance and quality control in all the technical work that's done. You know, we engineers, we're pretty good at making sure the work is done right, and we're always pretty good at handing it to the guy behind us to make sure the work is done right. But occasionally we do get blinders on, and it's difficult for us to see beyond what we're doing. And it's always good to hand that over to another office, another person, to really go through and rigorously check it. And I want to encourage the board to ask the technical team and the board of senior consultants to do so. I think it's an important finding. I am available to answer any of your questions. But again, I just wanted to reiterate the cooperation has been good. A deep cutoff wall is technically feasible. It's really more of a matter of cost. I would also appreciate looking at relief wells to help save some of the land in this area. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Karen Diepenbrock?
Good morning, Mr. Christoph and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to follow up on what Mark Gilbert of NGO has just told you and ask that you consider elevating the cutoff wall at portions of Reach B as identified by Mr. Gilbert and as presented to your Board of Senior Advisors as your preferred alternative in portions of Reach B. And I want to say that there's an old adage that we all probably learned from our mothers, which was haste makes waste. And I believe that you have the ability with your timing, because all of the reaches won't be constructed at the same time. And so you do have the ability to schedule Reach B for one of the later stages. I think it's very important right now to not get the environmental process going on an alternative that is not in the end going to be your preferred alternative. Because if there is a way of saving the homes, or at least some of them, and diminishing the impact on private property and the property owners in portions of Reach B, maybe not everyone, but portions of Reach B, then it would be good to work that out now and not to select your preferred alternative, because what's being said now is your preferred alternative is alternative 2 in Reach B, which is the alternative for Reach B that takes up to 400 feet, additional 400 feet. It's absolutely devastating for Reach B. And yet you've got testimony this morning, which we understand from the meetings that Mr. Gilbert has had, that is very persuasive that it is possible to do a cutoff wall in these portions of Reach B. And what I'm asking is that you take another month on the Reach B alternative and have everybody bear down very hard on the study that NGO has done. It's a very respected company that your engineers are used to working on, and see how much you can save in Reach B and identify that and study that as your preferred alternative. And then to just tell you something that I know you know far better than I, but when you get down to the end of the line and you switch from something that was not your preferred alternative to another preferred alternative, usually there is additional engineering work that needs to be done to bring that alternative up to the level of design that you need to bid your job and go forward. And that occasions delay, and it's also additional money. And so, again, going back to haste can make waste, that it's really smart to bear down now and make sure that you're studying as a preferred alternative the choice that protects private property and people's home to the maximum extent possible. And we think it would be worth doing that this month and working intensively. So we ask that as to Reach B, that be your separate recommendation, and that on the basis that will save time, it'll save money, and it'll save a number of people's homes. Thank you.
Denise Seals?
Good morning, directors. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm here both as a resident of West Sacramento and representing the business community. I know that you know that this decision is probably, from a business standpoint, the most significant decision for the community in the region on both sides of the river that anyone has had the opportunity to study and think out and move forward with. West Sacramento is a job center. The manufacturing and distribution jobs that we have here, plans as designated by the leadership of the city to move our community forward as a food hub, the SACOG Rural Urban Connection Strategy, recognizing here in Yolo County our ability to not only grow food product but also distribute it throughout the state is an important one that shouldn't be forgotten. Recently with Nippon Shokin, a wonderful international company coming to West Sacramento, and there were no small amounts of delays based on some very careful watching of what's happening with our flood protection here. Our ability to attract, to continue the economic recovery that for the region that West Sacramento is helping to drive. Yolo County General Plan and SACOG have designated West Sacramento as areas for continuing growth. And for the entire community, if there is not another home built in this town, the current and future housing values for the families that have made investments here are very much dependent on the decision that this board makes and our ability to move forward with this process. And then, of course, the business community, in a really unusual stance, encouraged and voted to tax themselves to help raise assessments for flood protection. As a resident, my husband and I moved here in 2001. We purchased a home off of Linden on the riverside. We moved here from Elk Grove, so we're very familiar with promised levels of flood protection. and also the experience of waking up in the middle of the night to a frantic phone call to help move people out of their homes because a small tributary has provided a problem, yet alone the Sacramento River. We carefully researched the credibility of the 200-year floodplain here because we considered originally our plan was to build. We looked at several pieces of property. We talked with a number of engineers and geologists, so we're familiar with the stability and integrity of dirt here in West Sacramento, basically. It's hard. It's a very sensitive issue, and we're really sensitive to, the potential for losing your home. But there are greater public safety issues here. And so as a resident and representing the business community, I would urge you to adopt the plan that affords the greatest level of protection, but also facilitates being able to come up with a financially complete project. And so I would ask that you consider approving the preliminary design alternative 2. Move the EIS forward. We need to start, because while haste can make waste, it's also true that he who hesitates is very often lost. Thank you.
Victoria?
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the board. I'm Victoria Yokoyama, and I grew up here in West Sacramento, and I'm currently working in Fresno in agriculture. I came back this week because my dad is making his final journey. My dad farmed in West Sacramento for all his life, even as a young man. He returned after the war and being placed in internment camps to come back to West Sacramento to continue on with his business in the vegetable crop industry. He built his dream home at 3000 South River Road, which is on segment F. That house is going to be removed. It's my mom's dream home. It's my father's American dream. It's going to be removed because they need a setback levy. I find it very interesting that the Southport project developers did comment on the fact that how confusing this project is, how trying to put all the puzzles together is very difficult. But there's a larger picture here. It's not just the emotional value that we have in the farm families that have been there all their life, and believe me, we intend to continue on farming there, that somehow the whole concept of benefit risk analysis seems to be ignored. Why is this project going on? 2006, we were told the state of California made the levees safe. They worked on those levees. And they had worked in the areas, in reinforced areas, that the Army Corps of Engineers has identified as weak points in the levee. And through their efforts in 2006, we were declared safe from a 100-year flood. Now the issue is somehow the standard has been raised. Now we have to protect the levees against a 200-year flood. Well, when we start talking about a 200-year flood, I think it's really important that you look at other segments around the Southport project. If you look at the area that's being developed, it's in a floodplain. It's a floodplain that's prone to seepage, flooding. But if you look back historically, because I grew up in West Sacramento, there's never been a flood there. But nonetheless, if there is a flood, it's going to be of disastrous proportions. Not counting the Sacramento side. We're just looking now in West Sacramento. But where are the weak links? Well, sure. Reinforce the levees along the Sacramento River. But what about the barge canal in the north? The barge canal holds back, what, 2 steel doors, a 20-foot wall of water that could breach those 2 steel doors and flood both north and south areas of the Sacramento River. What about the barge canal levees itself? And if you look at this design and this plan addressing the Sacramento River levees, what about the barge canal levees? What about the barge canal locks? Now, it seems that that's the responsibility of the Army Corps of Engineers, who's reinforcing the levee at this time, because the South River Road is now closed for this project. But I hear no comment from the Southport project people about their coordinated government efforts to make sure the residents of West Sacramento are safe from the 200-year flood. And now, the biggest thing that's going to happen in the Delta is they're going to put in a huge pipeline just 5 miles south of the last segment that's going to be reinforced. Well, how's this going to affect the 200-year flood? All that water is going to be diverted out of the Sacramento River. It's going to go through the pipeline to Sacramento. How is this figured in with this design? And the design itself, if you look at that, cost-risk analysis. Hey, it's cheaper to take out some of these traditional historic farms. The people that have lived and farmed there all their lives, the people that have built their dream houses, their children that are going to also live there, the future generations, the integrity and the beauty of the Delta itself, the South River Road, all of those have great aesthetic values, important values to the people and citizens of West Sacramento in the favor of development. Well, when I look at the engineering, it's in the engineering factor in this. Cut wall, let's talk cut wall. Cut wall is probably the most expensive means of reinforcing a levee.
Victoria, can we shorten it up just a little bit?
Okay, we're in segment F, segment G, because there's already housing there. We're afforded the benefits of a cut wall. Because we're in segment F and there aren't that many, there isn't a huge amount of homes built there, we only get a secondary levee that's going to take out our house and 1/3 of our ranch. But yet the people just down the road, what, half a mile, they get the cut wall. I think this cut wall needs to be readdressed. That cut wall is sitting now in farmland that we lived on. There's no geographical or geological evidence that there's any difference in the bedrock of the South River Road levee, where those homes are located and where our home is located. There is no differences. We farmed it. We know. There's even a breach in the levee where our old irrigation pipe went from completely through that South Levee Road. So these are considerations that need to be really investigated before your decisions are made. And I'm appealing to you. Please take a second look. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's all the slips that I have to speak. I turn to staff. Does staff have any comments or as far as what the public has spoken about?
Yes, I'd like to add a few comments here. What our intent was today, and I thought Dave Spock did a wonderful job of doing, was to show that the decision that staff is recommending that the board make today allows us the most flexibility as we move this process forward. From an environmental documentation standpoint, it's better to analyze a larger swath of land and then pull back as you further define your designs and move forward rather than going the opposite way. You can't do that. If you have an environmental document that analyzes a footprint and you take that document to completion, you can't go beyond that footprint. There's there would be incurred costs that by doing so you would have to write a supplement to your EIR. It's much better from a project management standpoint to analyze a larger piece of property, what the environmental effects are of that the larger project, and then be able to pull that back as you move forward. That's what I thought came across very clearly today. We also emphasized that the board directed staff to perform value engineering studies on B and F, and we are doing so. We're scoping out those studies now. We'll continue to bring information to the board as we further develop those studies. We will continue to meet with the property owners and their representatives as they see fit, as they would like to meet with us as we develop these studies. We would anticipate bringing the analysis of those value engineering studies back to this board sometime late this summer for the board to take an action on, to give staff direction on what design that the board wants us to move forward into 60% design. So we're not doing that right now. We're doing value engineerings in B and F. At the same time, we're advancing the environmental documentation process. So we're running on dual paths. It could be kind of confusing, but we were trying to articulate that as clearly as we could today. So I wanted to emphasize that. The value engineering studies, for both B and F, we're going to look at multiple options to minimize the impacts of correcting those levee deficiencies. So we're going to bring back to the board for each segment the different options, what those costs are. We agree with Mr. Gilbert that maybe a deep cutoff wall may be technically feasible in portions of segment B, and we're going to present those costs. What are those costs to do that, and how does that factor in? How does that impact the entire project from a cost perspective? Can we afford that type of treatment? What are the other treatments we're going to analyze, and what are those costs? So we're going to bring that information back to the board, make that very clear what those design options are, what the costs are, what the impacts are on the entire project, and then seek direction on how to move forward to 60% design. So that's what the work is going on right now. We're moving on the dual paths, like I said, from an environmental documentation standpoint and from a design analysis standpoint, and we're moving this project forward. So I wanted to see if there was any questions on that.
Anybody have any questions?
Okay.
One of the things we did receive today was a letter from CCON. I'd like to make sure that's part of the record. Anyway. Okay, now, the decision at hand. Do you have any comments or motion or what? What do you want to do?
I'll just make a public comment because I'm the alternate today, but I'm comfortable with the idea of moving forward with this alternative for the environmental purposes. I think the board made a good decision last meeting to set aside both sections B and F for further study, and hopefully that'll continue. And as we get deeper into the design, we'll see a more clearer picture as to the costs and what is actually able to do. I continually to be frustrated by the fact that we are being directed based on costs and our ability to provide, our limitations on how much flood protection that we are going to be able to provide in a timely manner. And that goes back to, the whole aspects of federal participation and the fact that if they were here today with a federal project, that we'd have much more resources to be able to do this. And it's frustrating that we may be making decisions short term, which we need to do to provide the flood protection quickly, but may not give us the best opportunity for long term. That's it.
Any other comments? Okay. I'll make a comment then. I think alternative 2, the design alternative 2 review plan is the right approach. It does give us the most flexibility. And as Tom has indicated also that we have other things to study also as we move forward. And we will do that. And that's one of the reasons I asked the question earlier in the comments as far as we're moving forward with the EIR. The EIR is going to identify some things. And I don't know if staff and our engineering techs and our engineering firms have hit all the answers, but if they haven't, certainly the EIR is going to address them. And we all have plenty of time to respond to the EIR. I don't think things are set in stone, and I know there's a number of folks out there that think it is, but it's really not. We will look at what happens through further design processes, and we will see if there is any way possible that we could. I don't care if you save one house. It doesn't make any difference. If you can save 10, that's better. If you can save additional properties, that's even better. But, I think we do need to move forward with this. And I think that staff has done a very, very good job of identifying and bringing forth possibilities and bringing forth alternatives that may get some tweaking. And so I think that this is the right approach, and I think that we should move forward with design alternative 2. So with that, I guess what I'm doing is looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we work with alternate number 2 with further review on B and F.
Okay. We're moving forward with the IR and further evaluation of. Right. And, okay. Okay, we have a motion. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, that is so ordered. WSAC project updates.
A couple of items I wanted to update the board on. On the 2011 EIPs, the Rivers and CHP, we're in project closeout mode now. We are wrapping up, all the contractual elements with our contractors. We're going to start moving into the project documentation phase, the record drawings, our construction documentation report. We'll be setting up transfer meetings with the state and the Army Corps, and then we also have to do a project closeout documentation report for the state in terms for the EIP funding. So we have a lot of documentation that we have to go through to wrap up those projects so that we can ensure that in the future we're going to get those projects certified. So as Mr. Zollo pointed out, from the financial statement, we've had a lot of expenditures on those 2 projects. You'll start seeing those winding down within the next 3, 4, 5 months. We hope to close out those projects fully. On the general reevaluation report, I have some good news to report there. On March 1st, we had our feasibility scoping meeting milestone. That was with the Sacramento district staff, with Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. They were on the phone participating in that conference, and the San Francisco division office was also participating in that milestone. It was about a 4-hour meeting. It's your existing conditions report. We had participation from the state and the Corps there. So we really had excellent participation from both, or representation from both the state and the Corps. The chief of planning in the Pacific region for the Army Corps was running the meeting, and he really was an advocate for our project. He was moving the meeting through. He was addressing comments, allowing myself and the state representative to make our statements and provide input throughout the process. We achieved the milestone, so that there's an official, you have to meet a certain milestone in order to move the study forward. We met that milestone, so it was a very successful event. So, and actually the head of planning out of the Sacramento division said that this was her best F3 milestone, F3 conference that she had ever attended. So it went over very well. The work we have to do now for the GRR, as I mentioned last month, the Corps headquarters has issued a 3x3x3 guidance. They're looking to cap these studies at 3 years, $3 million, and enough information that fits into a 3-inch 3-ring binder. So that's the Army way, 3x3x3. Yet they didn't really give their staffs real guidance on how to implement that. You have those 3 numbers, but what does that mean? So we're going to work very closely with Sacramento Division to try to make a pitch to utilize a lot of the existing information that we've developed over the years, and we developed that information for this very purpose, to feed into the GRR process to help expedite that process and reduce costs. We want them to reanalyze that information that we've already given them and highlight that maybe that's enough to get us through this process with of course, some some revisions to it, but maybe we don't have to add all these other additional analyses that they were initially contemplating. Now with this new guidance, maybe they can remove some of those further analysis that was going to add years to our study and millions of dollars to our study. So I'll keep the board apprised of our progress. That is our near-term focus, to implement that new 3x3x3 guidance and see what it does to both our schedule and our overall cost for the GRR. This all factors into the federal crediting for our EIP projects. And I made that very clear at this milestone with headquarters on the phone, that delays to our GRR, and now with the new ASA's decision regarding when federal credit can be achieved within that study process, could drastically impact our flood protection progress. And I let them know all the success that we're having with the projects that we're implementing, not just studies, but we're actually out building levees and reducing risk to life and property here in West Sacramento, that it's very important that they allow our process to move forward. So we made that very clear. There's a lot of, all these things factor into each other, the GRR, the federal crediting process, and our EIP program. And then the overarching element that we have out there that we didn't really talk about today, but we did last month, was the FEMA remapping and how that all factors in. All these processes moving forward, trying to build our levee improvements as quickly as possible, helps feed into that FEMA remapping process to help give us the best possible remap in the future, and potentially push that process out, because FEMA is working with West Sacramento. They understand our very aggressive levee improvement program that's moving forward. They're giving us time to implement that. They don't want to do anything to disrupt our progress. So we got to keep moving forward. So that's good news, and I'll keep the board apprised of what our progress is and trying to minimize that GRR schedule. And that's pretty much the update. So we're also the Sac Bank setback levee project that has been in winter suspension. We're hearing that project may start back up possibly sooner than April 15th, given the low precipitation we've had all winter. So when we get a little bit better information on that, which I'm expecting maybe next week or the week thereafter, I'll be able to provide that some updated information to the board also. But we should start seeing some construction work going on starting in at least mid-April, if not sooner. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions of Mike? No. Any informational items? Hearing none, looking for a motion to adjourn. It's been moved and seconded. So ordered. Shop? Yeah, Dave Shop. Oh. Okay. It was. This cost isn't not the issue.